In WW2 Poland, a single bar of soap traded for 2 full days of bread on the black market. Not gold. Not cash. Soap. And if you think that's an anomaly, a strange footnote from a war that ended 80 years ago, consider this. In every major societal collapse since 1914, the items that held the highest barter value weren't the ones people thought they'd need. They were the ones people forgot to prepare for until it was too late. Right now, in 2025, with conflicts escalating across multiple continents and economists openly discussing the fragility of global supply chains, the question of what actually holds value in a WW3 scenario is not a fringe prepper fantasy. It's a question that serious people are asking seriously. But here's what most survival videos get wrong. They tell you to buy gold. They tell you to stockpile ammo. They talk about expensive gear and elaborate bunker setups. What if the real answer is already sitting in your kitchen drawer? Today I'm giving you 9 cheap items, every single one under $40, most under $10, that historical evidence shows become the most valuable barter currency in a genuine collapse. I'm going to rank them by something I call barter density, the ratio of survival value to weight and cost. Because in an evacuation you can't carry everything. You need to know what earns the most per gram. And I'll tell you right now, number 1 on this list is something that almost no survival channel has ever put on a list like this. It's not a tool, it's not food, and it costs less than $1 per unit. But in every major conflict of the 20th century, the people who had it were the ones other people came to. Stick around because that one alone is worth the whole video. If you find this kind of practical, historically grounded preparedness content useful, hit subscribe. This channel goes deeper than the generic prepper lists you've already seen. Let's count down from 9. Item 9. Lighters. The fire monopoly. Let's start with what sounds like the most obvious item on this list, and then I'm going to tell you something about it that most people don't know. In the first hours after Hurricane Katrina made landfall in 2005, eyewitness accounts from convenience store owners in the affected areas reports suggest lighters and matches were among the first items to sell out, ahead of bottled water in some locations. Because the power was gone, cooking required fire, and most people didn't own a single working lighter. They'd relied on electric stoves their entire lives. Fire is the oldest human technology. And in a WW3 grid-down scenario, it becomes the most immediate survival priority. Here's something specific that most people don't know about a standard BIC lighter. A single BIC lighter is engineered to produce approximately 3,000 individual flames before it runs out of fuel. Think about what that means. 3,000 fire starts from a single object that fits in your front pocket and costs about $1.5. That is an extraordinary concentration of survival utility in an extraordinary small form factor. Now here's what most people get wrong about fire-starting alternatives. There's a common assumption in the prepper community that flint and steel or rubbing wood together are acceptable backup methods. In theory, yes. In practice, these methods fail in conditions of high humidity. Anything above roughly 70% relative humidity makes friction fire starting extremely unreliable, even for experienced outdoors people. If you've ever tried to start a fire with damp tinder, you know exactly what I mean. The pro tip here is simple but important. Store your lighters inside sealed Ziploc bags. Butane, the fuel inside a standard lighter, degrades at a rate of approximately 15 to 20% per year. A lighter stored in a hot car or near a heat source loses significant fuel capacity over time. A sealed bag in a cool, dark location extends their effective shelf life considerably. Now, the barter density argument. A 5-pack of BSE lighters costs around $6 at any hardware store today. In documented barter scenarios following Hurricane Katrina, single lighters were reportedly exchanging for $10 to $15 worth of goods in informal trading. Fire for cooking. Fire for water purification. Fire for warmth. Fire for signaling. In a world where the grid is down, whoever controls reliable fire starting has an immediate tangible advantage. But fire only helps you if you can see what you're doing. And seeing, especially seeing information, not just your surroundings, brings us to item 8, which is the single most underrated preparedness item of the modern era. Item 8. Hand crank emergency radio, the information weapon. Here is a fact that most survival content ignores completely. In every major conflict or infrastructure failure since the year 2000, the first thing to go offline is not the power grid. It's not the water supply. It is communications. Cell towers are priority targets in both cyber attack and physical strike scenarios. During the 2003 Northeast blackout in the United States, a non-conflict, purely accidental infrastructure failure, cellular networks in the affected region became saturated and largely non-functional within 20 minutes of the outage beginning. Not because the towers were damaged, simply because every person in the blackout zone tried to make a call at the same time. Now imagine that scenario with deliberate disruption layered on top. After the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan, one of the most catastrophically impactful disasters in modern history, battery-powered and hand-crank emergency radios were documented as the primary source of civilian information for over 72 hours. Not smartphones, not internet, not television, radios. FEMA's official preparedness guidelines designate the hand-crank emergency radio as a Tier 1 preparedness item, meaning it sits in the same category of importance as water and first aid. And yet almost nobody owns one. Here's what most people get wrong. They assume that if something major happens, they'll use their smartphone to get information. This assumption has three fatal flaws. First, cell networks fail under load. Second, your phone battery dies in 8 to 12 hours under normal use, faster under stress when you're constantly checking for updates. Third, in a WW3 scenario involving EMP, electromagnetic pulse, unprotected electronics can be permanently disabled in an instant. A hand-crank emergency radio has no battery dependency for its core function. You crank it. It works. The pro tip is to look for a model with three specific capabilities. NOAA weather band reception for domestic emergency alerts, AM and FM for local information, and shortwave capability. Shortwave is the feature most people skip, and it's arguably the most valuable. Shortwave frequencies can carry international broadcasts across thousands of miles. If domestic networks go dark, shortwave is how you learn what's happening beyond your immediate geography. A quality hand-crank radio, with all three functions, costs between $25 and $40. In an information blackout scenario, knowing evacuation routes 2 hours before the crowds do is not a minor advantage. It is potentially the difference between getting out and being gridlocked. Information is a survival weapon. Now let's talk about the most fundamental physical survival need. Item 7. Water purification tablets, the weight-to-life ratio. The reference point most survival videos use for water purification is the portable water filter, something like a life straw. And that's a solid recommendation. But there's a scenario where a water filter becomes a liability rather than an asset, and nobody talks about it. A life straw weighs approximately 2 ounces and costs around $20. It's excellent for stationary survival if you're sheltering in place near a water source. It's an outstanding tool. But consider the mobile scenario. You're evacuating, you're on foot, you're carrying everything that matters on your back. You've got 72 hours of food, your documents, your medications, a change of clothes. In that scenario, weight isn't just a comfort issue. It's a safety issue. Every extra pound slows you down. Water purification tablets, specifically chlorine dioxide tablets, which are the current WHO recommended standard for emergency water treatment, weigh 1.4 ounces for a pack of 30 tablets. Each tablet purifies 1 liter of water. That's 30 liters of safe drinking water from a package smaller than a deck of cards, weighing less than a golf ball. The World Health Organization's emergency response protocols list chemical water purification as the primary field solution for disaster zones, where movement is a factor, not because it's preferable to filtration in ideal conditions, but because in a high-movement, high-stress scenario, deployment speed, D, and weight are decisive variables. Here's the what most people get wrong moment. The 30-minute wait time for chlorine dioxide tablets is actually an advantage in disguise. It forces you to stop, rest, and hydrate deliberately, something that stressed evacuees often fail to do, leading to dehydration-related cognitive impairment at exactly the moment when clear thinking is most critical. The pro tip: combine tablets with a simple bandana or cotton cloth as a pre-filter. Pour your collected water through the fabric first to remove sediment and particulates. The tablets then work at maximum effectiveness on cleaner water. In the 2010 Haiti earthquake response, water purification tablets were among the top 3 most requested items by NGOs in the first 72 hours of relief operations, outpacing requests for bottled water among field relief coordinators because tablets could be distributed and self-administered without infrastructure. Clean water is the baseline. But in a prolonged crisis, the ability to preserve food is equally critical. Item 6 is one of the oldest survival tools in human history. Item 6. Salt. Ancient currency, modern weapon. The word salary comes directly from the Latin word salarium, a term for the payments made to Roman soldiers. This is not a folk etymology. This is documented Roman military history. And it tells you something fundamental about how human civilization has always valued salt. Archaeologists excavating the Hallstatt salt mines in Austria, one of the oldest continuously operated mining sites in the world, have found evidence of organized salt trade stretching back approximately 7,000 years. 7,000 years of humans treating salt as a commodity worth extracting, transporting, and trading. Before gold. Before silver. Before most things we call valuable today. The reason is completely practical. Salt is a food preservation technology. Before refrigeration existed, which on the timescale of human history was roughly 4 minutes ago, salt was the primary method by which humans kept meat and fish from rotting. Used correctly in a curing process, a single pound of non-iodized canning salt can preserve approximately 10 to 15 pounds of meat, extending its shelf life from 2 days at room temperature to 6 months or longer. In a scenario where you've harvested game, received food that might spoil, or need to create a food reserve without electricity, it is a food preservation engine. Here's what most people get wrong. They keep iodized table salt in their preparedness stockpile. Iodized salt is fine for cooking, but the iodine content can interfere with fermentation chemistry and the curing process. For genuine food preservation, you want non-iodized kosher salt or canning salt. Brands like Morton Canning and Pickling Salt are widely available and cost roughly $3 for a 4-pound bag. Historical records from WW2 German black markets suggest salt commanded prices 10 to 20 times its peacetime value. The barter case is straightforward. At $3 for 4 pounds, salt has one of the highest barter density ratios of anything on this list. Tiny cost. Enormous functional value. Near unlimited shelf life. Light. Compact. And in a post-grid world, anyone who wants to preserve food will need it. Salt preserves your food supply. The next item preserves your ability to function when there's no pharmacist within reach. Item 5. Over-the-counter medicines. Your crisis pharmacy. In WW2 Warsaw, by 1943, a single aspirin tablet could reportedly be traded for a loaf of bread. Specific trade ratio based on historical accounts of the Warsaw black market economy. Exact valuations varied. Not because aspirin was exotic or difficult to synthesize. Because pain doesn't stop during a war. Fever doesn't stop. Headaches don't stop. And when the medical system collapses, even the most basic relief becomes extraordinary. Most survival content stops at stock some paracetamol and ibuprofen. That's a start, but it's incomplete. Let me give you the actual crisis pharmacy kit. The 4 categories of over-the-counter medication that address the 4 most common non-trauma medical conditions in disaster and conflict environments. First, fever and pain management. Paracetamol and ibuprofen, as the reference mentions, are essential. They're cheap, widely available, and address the most universally experienced symptoms. Second, gastrointestinal illness. This one is critical and almost universally overlooked. In the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami response, diarrheal disease accounted for approximately 40% of the post-disaster illness burden. 40%. Loperamide, sold under the brand name Imodium, available for a couple of dollars at any pharmacy. Pair it with oral rehydration salts, or ORS packets, which replace the electrolytes lost to dehydration. The combination of loperamide and ORS is, according to WHO protocols, more immediately life-saving in a post-disaster environment. Third, allergic reactions. Diphenhydramine, sold as Benadryl, treats everything from mild allergic reactions to insect stings. In a scenario where you're sleeping in unfamiliar environments, eating unfamiliar foods, or dealing with stress-exacerbated allergies. Fourth, a 2019 WHO report on conflict zone civilian health identified fever management as one of the top unmet medical needs in non-combat civilian populations during active conflict, meaning the demand is there, the supply is disrupted, and the people who have it gain immediate barter leverage. Here is the complete kit. 100 tablets of paracetamol. 30 tablets of ibuprofen. 20 tablets of loperamide. 10 ORS packets. 20 tablets of diphenhydramine. Total cost: under $25. Total weight: under 8 ounces. That is your crisis pharmacy. Now, do you already have a medicine kit at home? Drop a Y or an N in the comments right now. I genuinely want to know because the answer tells us a lot about how prepared most people actually are. The next item sounds mundane, but it had a military pedigree before it ever entered a hardware store. Item 4. Duct tape, the engineer's currency. In April 1972, the crew of Apollo 17 used duct tape on the surface of the moon. A fender on the lunar roving vehicle had broken loose, and without a replacement, the crew faced rooster tails of lunar dust being thrown directly at their equipment and suits, a potential mission-ending problem. Their solution was a strip of duct tape, some maps and some clamps. The repair worked. The mission continued. If it's good enough for 238,000 miles from the nearest hardware store, it's good enough for your neighborhood during a 2-week grid-down scenario. Here's a piece of history that most people don't know. The original duct tape, yes, duck, not duct, was developed during World War II by Johnson & Johnson for the United States military. Its specific purpose was to waterproof ammunition cases. It was a war material long before it became a household name. The military version was olive green, water-resistant and designed for field conditions, exactly the use case we're discussing. Now here's the angle that makes duct tape unique on this list, and it's the barter concept that nobody else is discussing. Most survival items are consumed once. You use the lighter, the flame happens. You take the pill, the pain reduces. But duct tape is a service currency. A single roll of tape, in the hands of someone willing to do repairs, enables dozens of individual transactions. You're not just trading the tape, you're trading the service of fixing things, with the tape as your tool. In a barter economy where physical goods are scarce and professional repair services don't exist, the ability to quickly fix a tent, a boot, a backpack strap, a window seal, a water container, or a medical splint. Here's the pro tip on product selection. Standard duct tape loses adhesive integrity below approximately 0 degrees Celsius. In cold environments, which is a significant factor in any Northern Hemisphere conflict scenario, standard tape peels and fails. Gorilla Tape maintains adhesion down to approximately -10 degrees Celsius. It costs a few dollars more per roll. In genuinely cold conditions, that difference is not trivial. A 30-yard roll of Gorilla Tape costs around $10 and can accomplish an estimated 40 to 60 distinct repair tasks. That's roughly 17 to 25 cents of cost per repair unit. The barter density on duct tape is extraordinary. But duct tape fixes the physical world around you. The next item addresses a need that no repair tool can touch, and it's a dimension of survival that almost no prepper channel even acknowledges. Item 3. Soap, the disease barrier. In 1918, as the Spanish flu swept through military camps across the United States and Europe, researchers observed a pattern that was striking even by the standards of that catastrophic pandemic. Military camps and units that enforced rigorous hand-washing protocols reportedly showed notably lower mortality rates than those that didn't. Specific percentages vary across historical accounts, but the directional relationship between hygiene enforcement and survival outcomes is supported by epidemiological literature of the period. The difference wasn't a new drug. It wasn't a vaccine. It was soap. A landmark study published in The Lancet in 2003 examined hand-washing behavior in developing countries and found that basic soap use reduced the incidence of diarrheal disease by 47% and acute respiratory infections by 23%. These are two of the most prevalent and lethal conditions in post-disaster and conflict zone environments. Let me put that in practical terms. In a crowded evacuation center with compromised water infrastructure, nearly half of the diarrheal illness cases are preventable with soap. Preventable. Here's what most people get wrong about soap in a preparedness context. Bar soap works fine at home. But in a mobility scenario, a bar of soap is awkward to carry, degrades when wet, and has poor weight-to-wash ratio. There are two better alternatives. The first is concentrated Castile soap, products like Dr. Bronner's, which is an 18-in-1 formulation. The same bottle functions as hand soap, body wash, dish soap, laundry soap, and wound cleanser. When diluted at the recommended ratio of 1 part soap to 40 parts water, a single $10 bottle yields approximately 256 individual hand washes. That's less than 4 cents per wash. The second option, and the most underrated hygiene product in the entire preparedness space, is soap sheets. These are paper-thin, credit card-sized leaves of compressed soap, 50 of which weigh approximately 10 grams. Each sheet produces a full lather for a single hand washing. They cost a few dollars and last indefinitely in storage. In an evacuation bag, these are essentially weightless disease prevention. Soap keeps disease out. But the next item on this list addresses something that soap, water, and medicine can't fix: the psychological dimension of human behavior in a crisis and the barter currency that exploits it. Item 2. Seeds. The long game. Before I get to item 2, I want to plant something in your mind about item 1. The number 1 item on this list is not a tool. It's not food. It's not medicine. It costs less than $1 per unit. And in every major societal collapse of the last 100 years, from WW2 POW camps to post-Soviet Eastern Europe, the people who had it were the ones other people came to, regardless of what else they owned. Hold that thought. We'll get there in a moment. Now, item 2. Seeds. In the winter of 1941, German forces completed the encirclement of Leningrad. What followed was one of the longest and most devastating sieges in modern military history: 872 days of isolation, starvation, and suffering. During this time, a group of Soviet botanists and scientists at the Vavilov Institute of Plant Genetic Resources in Leningrad faced an extraordinary moral test. They were surrounded by one of the largest seed collections in the world, thousands of varieties of food crops, while simultaneously starving to death. Several of them died of starvation rather than eat the seeds they were protecting. They understood something that most people don't articulate clearly. Seeds are not food. Seeds are the source of all future food. Eating a seed is a one-time caloric transaction. Planting it is a decision with potentially infinite returns. Here's what most people get wrong about seeds as a preparedness item. Many people think they can simply save seeds from grocery store produce: tomatoes, peppers, squash. The problem is that the majority of commercially grown produce uses hybrid varieties, and hybrid seeds often don't reproduce true to type. The second generation grows unpredictably. For a genuine renewable food supply, you need heirloom, open-pollinated seeds, varieties that produce genetically consistent offspring across generations. The practical recommendation: a 25-variety heirloom seed vault, with a shelf life of 5 or more years, costs approximately $30. Priority varieties for survival gardening are kale, fastest to nutritional maturity, highest nutrient density per square foot of growing space; radishes, which complete their full growth cycle in as little as 23 days, and bush beans, which are nitrogen-fixing, meaning they actually improve the soil they grow in while producing high-protein food. A single packet of kale seeds costing around $3 contains enough seeds to theoretically cultivate over 400 individual plants, each capable of producing approximately 1 pound of greens per harvest cycle. This is not a finite resource. It is a renewable one. In a short crisis, canned food is your solution. In a long crisis, seeds are your salvation. And now, item 1. The thing that has outperformed gold, food, and medicine as barter currency in documented conflict scenarios. The thing the most prepared person in every 20th century collapse always had. Item 1. Tobacco, the psychological currency. In 1945, a British economist named R.A. Radford was released from a German prisoner of war camp. He had spent years inside the camp, and being an economist, he had done what economists do. He had observed and documented the internal economy of the camp. His paper, published in Economica in 1945, titled "The Economica Organization of a POW Camp," became one of the most cited documents in the history of economic theory. What did Radford find? He found that cigarettes had spontaneously become the functional currency of the camp. Not because the prisoners had agreed to use them. Not because anyone organized it. But because in conditions of scarcity and stress, cigarettes fulfilled every requirement of a stable currency. They were divisible, portable, durable enough for short-term storage, and universally demanded. Everything in the camp, food, clothing, labor, services, was priced in cigarettes. This was not an isolated case. In the occupation period of post-WW2 Germany, from 1945 to approximately 1948, the official currency, the Reichsmark, had effectively collapsed. American cigarettes, specifically Chesterfields and Lucky Strikes, functioned as the de facto currency of the German black market. A single carton of American cigarettes could trade for goods equivalent to several weeks of factory wages. They were more stable, more universally accepted, and more liquid than any official monetary instrument available. In every major collapse, WW2 POW camps, post-Soviet Eastern Europe in the 1990s, the Bosnian War, documented accounts from Venezuela's economic collapse. Tobacco appears as one of the most persistent barter currencies. Not gold, not cash, tobacco. Here's the insight that most preppers miss completely. You don't have to smoke to benefit from this. Most people who are preparing for a crisis don't smoke. And because they don't smoke, they don't think about stockpiling tobacco. But that reasoning confuses personal consumption with barter strategy. You're not stockpiling tobacco to smoke. You're stockpiling it because nicotine addiction doesn't pause during a war. Stress doesn't pause during a war. And the psychological relief that tobacco provides, whether rational or not, makes it one of the most demand-stable barter commodities that exists. The practical details. Sealed cartons of manufactured cigarettes have a shelf life of approximately 2 years. Rolling tobacco stored in airtight containers, vacuum-sealed with oxygen absorbers, can maintain quality for 5 or more years. And tobacco seeds, which are essentially weightless and cost a few dollars per packet, contain 500 or more seeds capable of producing a full tobacco crop. For the non-smoker building a barter inventory, 10 cartons of cigarettes at current retail cost approximately $80 to $100 depending on your location. That is $80 to $100 invested in one of the most historically proven barter currencies in modern human history. Think about that. Gold is heavy. Gold requires verification. Gold requires that the person you're trading with trusts the purity of what you're offering. A cigarette requires none of that. Everyone knows what it is. Everyone knows what it does. And in conditions of extreme psychological stress, its demand is essentially inelastic. This is why tobacco sits at number 1 on a list about what makes you rich in a WW3 scenario. Not because it keeps you alive directly. Soap does that, water tablets do that, medicine does that. But because it gives you liquidity. It gives you a universally accepted medium of exchange that lets you acquire everything else you need. That is what makes you rich in a collapse. Let's bring this together through the barter density framework I introduced at the beginning. We've covered 9 items today. A lighter that produces 3,000 flames for $1.5. A hand crank radio that gives you information when every other communication channel is dead. Water purification tablets that produce 30 liters of clean water for $8 and weigh less than a golf ball. Salt with a 7,000-year track record as a commodity currency. A crisis pharmacy kit for under $25 that addresses the 4 most common post-disaster medical conditions. Duct tape with a military pedigree and a barter density of $0.25 per repair transaction. Soap that reduces disease burden by nearly half. Seeds that represent not food but the infinite source of future food. And tobacco, the psychological currency that has spontaneously emerged as the functional medium of exchange in every major societal collapse of the modern era. None of these items cost more than $40. Most cost under $10. Combined, you could acquire meaningful quantities of all 9 for under $200. And here's the thing I want to leave you with. Preparedness is not pessimism. The people who stored these items in Warsaw, in Leningrad, in post-war Germany, they weren't hoping for collapse. They were acknowledging a truth that history has validated repeatedly. That systems which feel permanent are not. That the distance between ordinary life and extraordinary difficulty is much shorter than we want to believe. And that the people who understood what actually holds value when systems fail, not the people who trusted gold or governments, but the people who trusted fire and soap and salt and the things that solve the most basic human needs, those were the people who made it through. You don't need a bunker. You don't need $10,000 in gold. You need a drawer with the right things in it. Now, drop a 1 in the comments if you already own at least 3 of these items. I want to see how prepared this community actually is. And if you want to go even deeper, next week we're publishing a video that might be the most important one we've made. It's called 7 Things You Think Will Save You in WW3 That Will Actually Get You Killed. The conventional prepper wisdom has some dangerous blind spots, and we're going to expose all of them. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Stay prepared. Stay ahead.